Hey team, and welcome to another video in our Astrological Magical Elections video series, where we survey the skies to discover appropriate moments for talismanic ritual. Today we are going to talk about the magical elections that are going to be available to us between January 2nd, our Capricorn New Moon, and our Cancer Full Moon, which occurs on January 17th. Today I'm coming to you injured because whole sign houses are a scam. But for today's video, we do have more electional opportunities to talk about than we did last time, and some of them even include some of my favorite mansions, which is really fun to be able to share with you guys. But there's actually a lot of overlap between the three locations that I normally survey, so we're going to kind of do this video more old school style, talking about each of the opportunities separately, and then kind of going into the charts for the locations, rather than taking each location kind of as its own segment in the video. So we're going to be doing it that way today. Going ahead and getting started, our first electional opportunity that we're going to pick up for this lunation is going to be an opportunity for a 26th Lunar Mansion talisman. Now, the 26th Lunar Mansion is a mansion that is primarily focused on relationships. It is primarily focused on providing us with good, healthy, balanced, beneficial relationships between, two people who care about each other and want to support and uplift one another. The 26th Lunar Mansion is not necessarily a mansion that is focused on exclusively romantic love. It can also be, love between friends or family members or anything like that. It can absolutely do romantic love, but it can also be applied more to general universal love themes. So if you're somebody who is looking for, more out of your friendships, out of your relationships, who's looking for better quality friends, maybe you've been hurt by people in the past, haven't we all, I guess, but you're looking for somebody that you can count on for a group, for belonging, then the 26th Lunar Mansion is definitely something that can help you do that, or to help you deepen a bond or a connection with another person. The 26th Lunar Mansion is very helpful for. So for our North American version of this chart, their 26th Lunar Mansion opportunity takes place on January 5th at around 12:30. This chart here is set for 12:36. And taking a look at our chart, the only way that I was able to get this mansion's talisman to work. Basically, I had to build it in a way that I don't typically like to build it. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of the moon on the ascendant or the midheaven for sort of the most effective, the best, the least controversial, I guess we'll say, Lunar Mansion talismans. But there are other houses that the moon can be in and still facilitate a really great connection to the spirit and really help the efficacy of the talisman itself. So the 1st and the 10th are the best, but they're not the only place that we can be. And this chart is just an example of that, where we have the moon now in the 26th Lunar Mansion in the 11th house, and applying the conjunction with Jupiter in Pisces. This was really kind of the key part of the election that we wanted to maintain. The ruler of the ascendant here, with Aries on the ascendant, this points us to Mars in Sagittarius here, and this was the only kind of sweet spot that I could really get for this talisman, this sort of late Aries rising. Because if we did a Pisces rising version of the chart, then we would have to deal with Jupiter as the ruler of the 1st and the 12th house, and that's not something that I really like to work with. If I waited until later, then we would have Taurus on the ascendant, which would have Venus as the ruler of the 1st house, and I don't do the ruler of the 1st house retrograde in talismans. I don't think that's a good plan. And then if I put the Moon-Jupiter conjunction on the ascendant, then we would have an issue where I would have to make a decision where they were both bad. Basically, if I put the moon more angular with Aquarius rising, that puts Saturn as the ruler of the 1st and the 12th house. I don't like that. Or if I pushed it more to where Jupiter was angular with the early Pisces rising, then the moon would be in the 12th house, and that can't work either. So this was really the only kind of way that I could finesse it to be something more worthwhile and more useful. There might be an option, depending on where you live, for Gemini rising with the moon angular in the 10th house. And that one you're going to have to kind of make a decision about how you feel about the Mercury-Saturn conjunction, whether this is far enough away for you to be okay with or not, and just kind of roll with it from there. So, but that's kind of the options here that we're working with. Or late Aries rising, moon in the 11th house applying the conjunction with Jupiter. That's going to be the 26th Lunar Mansion talisman for North America. So the Western European and North African versions of this chart have sort of one of those like alternatives that I talked about with the North American chart with the Mercury ruled ascendant. Here in this chart, we have the moon in the 26th lunar mansion on the midheaven, more powerful, more where I like her, applying the conjunction with Jupiter and Pisces, like I like it. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're after. And the ruler of the first house is this Mercury here in Aquarius. And like I said, it's sort of, I offer it because it is technically viable. And it really just comes down to how comfortable you are with Saturn and Mercury's conjunction, because typically in elections, we don't want the ruler of the first house to be afflicted by a malefic planet. Being conjoined to malefic is a textbook example of being afflicted by malefic. And so it's kind of up to you to decide how you want to, like, if this is something that you want to work with, if this is an energy that you would like to have, and it's totally fine to walk away from it. But it was just another really kind of difficult chart to finesse into being something usable, because I wasn't able to do like the late Aries ascendant like I was for the North American continent, because through that time the 12th house is very large. This might be something that works better depending on your location. To where if you can get this chart with a late Aries rising and the moon in the 11th house, that's probably the better option to do. But for the area that I normally set the chart for, the 12th house ends up being very large. And so the moon-Jupiter conjunction, even though late Aries is rising, still is around the 12th house cusp. And that wasn't okay. Of course, moving into the Taurus ascendant, had Venus retrograde, couldn't use that. And then moving into like the early Gemini ascendant is something that I thought about. But that kind of gives us to the nodes being very angular, and I didn't like that very much. And also the opposition to Mars happening, Mars here in the middle degrees of Sagittarius, that coming towards the ascendant, which I didn't like. I thought it was easier to move past it and then be like, well, here you go. So that's sort of how we ended up with this kind of a chart here. But all in all, still workable. It just really depends on how you feel about the Mercury-Saturn conjunction, whether or not that's something you want to bring into it. If you think it's far enough to not really worry about, that's totally great. Finally, for our 26th Lunar Mansion talismans, the Australian version of this chart is a little more similar to the North American version. Here we have here we have the middle degrees of Aries rising, pointing to Mars in Sagittarius. Mars is unafflicted by Saturn or the Sun at this point in time. We have the moon in the 26th lunar mansion in the 11th house, applying to that conjunction with Jupiter, which we really like. Again, unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. And there's just not a lot of, this is probably like the best version, I think, of it. Looks very, very, very safe and serene. Not a whole lot of anything really going on with it. And that's kind of normally how we like to see these types of charts. Leaving our 26 lunar mansion elections behind, now we're moving into our next electional opportunity, which is going to be for a third lunar mansion talisman. The third lunar mansion is definitely my favorite, and it's one that I recommend people pick up whenever we have the opportunity for. I really like the sort of like late December time frame, because this is usually where we start to see a lot of the really good third lunar mansion talismans start to manifest, and this is no different. This is probably one of the better ones, honestly. There are some things that I wish could be a little bit different with it, but this is just what we have to work with. So that's going to be how it is, I guess. And for this, the third lunar mansion is a talisman that is primarily focused on like wish granting. It is, the Picatrix talks about it being for the acquisition of all good things. So it's really very flexible in what it can provide and what it can do. So this is part of why I really recommend it. Because almost for any need that you could possibly have, the third lunar mansion can definitely answer it in helping to provide what you need, helping to provide some assistance or some progress in attaining what you need. It's also one that I've used to great effect in the past. One of my first talismans that I ever made, and really one of the ones, like the one that really opened my eyes to what this practice of astrological magic can actually accomplish. So all those reasons are reasons why I definitely recommend it, especially because it's a very easy talisman. The spirit's very easy to get along with. So yada, 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 yada. For the North American version of this chart, this takes place on January 10th at around 12:15. And here we're focused, of course, on the moon being very angular in the third lunar mansion. And at this time, she's applying the sextile to Jupiter and Pisces in the 11th house, our kind of key to everything, our super secret strategy for creating powerful talismanic elections for the next few months to come is going to be have it apply to Jupiter. Just have the moon apply to Jupiter and anything that she does, and everything will be fine. So that's my secret weapon for you guys this 2-week period. and, for the next several months while Jupiter remains in Pisces. The ruler of the first house in this is going to be this Mars here in Sagittarius. It's just fine. Mars isn't afflicted by Mars or Saturn. The ascendant isn't Mars isn't afflicted by Mars or Saturn. Mars isn't afflicted by the Sun or Saturn. The ascendant's not afflicted by Saturn, yada yada. Everything works out really well. You have to kind of be careful with third lunar mansion talismans now, because Saturn is casting a square to the very end of the mansion. So you have to make sure that there's some better planet there to intercept it, and in this case it's going to be Jupiter here. So our Western Europe and North African version of this chart is a little bit different from the North American version because we have the moon in a different house. As much as I like the moon to be angular in the ascendant or the midheaven, the 11th house is another house that she can begin and operate very well within this capacity. Here we're looking at the moon being in the third lunar mansion and still applying the sextile to now a very angular Jupiter, while the moon is less angular but still in a very nice, very proper house. At the same time, we have the moon here ruling the first house, which kind of limits the amount of planets that we have to take a look at. So we're really only very, very focused on the moon and her condition, what she's up to. The moon's not afflicted by Saturn. The moon's not afflicted by Mars. The moon's not combust the sun. All of our typical landmines when it comes to looking for elections are avoided by focusing on the moon. The early degrees of Cancer are unafflicted by Mars or Saturn at this time. The nodes aren't in the way. So this is just a really nice, very strong third lunar mansion talisman. It would be better if the moon and Jupiter sort of swap places, as it were, where the moon were more angular than Jupiter. But this is fine. This is okay. This is not a bad talisman this is not a bad election to invest in with the creation of a talisman, is what I mean. The Australian version of this chart is a little bit more similar to the Western European and North African version, with the Cancer rising again. And this chart takes place on January 10th at around 6:36. That's what this chart is set for. And here we have, sort of our typical setups with the moon conjoined the midheaven, our more typical setups, I guess we should say, with the moon conjoined the midheaven in the second lunar mansion and applying the sextile to Jupiter in Pisces, again, our secret weapon for the creation and production of effective lunar mansion talismans, effective positive lunar mansion talismans, I guess we should say. The moon as our primary focus in this chart, not only because we're always focused on the moon in any magical election, but also because the moon rules the first house in this specific magical election. She's unafflicted by Mars or Saturn. She's not combust the sun. She's not with the node. All of our typical moon issues that we look for are not a problem in this chart, making it another really great example. A little bit better probably than the Western European version, just because the moon is more potent, being this angular in the chart. So the final of our Lunar Mansion elections is actually going to be for an 8th Lunar Mansion talisman. The 8th Lunar Mansion is one that's primarily focused on victory in all of its many different forms. Primarily, of course, it's more like the militaristic kind of victory, the conquering of another person or thing, coming out on top. And the 8th Lunar Mansion can be very effective in that methodology or that modality if you are a medieval general on your way to conquer like Anatolia. Today, people seek victory over different things or in different ways. It can be something as really confrontational as a lawsuit where you want to be victorious and come out on top. It can be an issue where it's more like a competition, more like either like a team or an individual kind of competition, or it can be something more like applying to an award, like the victory of being selected for an award for a position or for a thing. So it's often something that can be utilized for applying for jobs, trying to secure promotion, trying to secure a raise, anything like that, anything that you would be applying for to be selected. These are all endeavors that the 8th Lunar Mansion can really help you focus on, being victorious, being more successful. But it's usually the idea of being successful at the expense of other people, or getting something that not everybody can have, being selected for something that is more limited. That's really more the 8th Lunar Mansion style. So kind of keep that in mind if you're thinking about using it. Is this something that me being selected for means that other people cannot be selected for? A little bit selfish, I guess, but that's okay. Everybody deserves to have a little bit of moment of selfishness every now and again. Looking to our elections for this 8th Lunar Mansion talisman, the North American version of this chart takes place on January 15th at around 3:45, which is exactly what this chart is set for. The main thing that we want to look for is the early Cancer rising, with the moon very angular in the 8th Lunar Mansion. Here we're going to go into our super secret technique that you're not going to tell anybody about by having the moon apply a very tight trine to Jupiter in Pisces, who rules the 10th house in this chart, which I think is kind of neat. I don't super look into house rulerships for these charts like that, but I think that they're neat when they do match up in a way similar to this. At the same time, we're going to make sure that the moon, who is not only our focal planet in constructing Lunar Mansion talismans or any magical election at all, but also because she rules the first house, is unafflicted, and she is so, having moved past the opposition to Mars, and is averse to Saturn, so we don't have to worry about that, and does not combust the sun, is not applying close to a node, anything like that. All in all, a really safe, a really nice, a really secure election for victory and support. So I recommend grabbing this up if you are in a situation that you could possibly use an extra helping hand. The Western European and North African version of this chart takes place on January 15th at just before 8 o'clock. 7:53 p.m. is what this chart is set for, and this is another one where we have to kind of finesse it to be right, or like as close as we can to make it something workable. Here we have the moon in the 8th Lunar Mansion, in the 11th house, which is fine. Not the best where I typically want her, but the 11th house works fine, and she's still applying the trine to our super secret weapon, Jupiter, here in Pisces. The thing that we had to do was we needed to get a good ascendant degree on a good ascendant degree rising, and so we kind of decided on 24 degrees Leo, or just kind of like this late Leo, something that gets the moon sort of as angular as she possibly can, while clinging on to the Leo rising sign, which brings our attention to the sun, who is unafflicted by Mars or Saturn, much like the moon is. And the reason why we wanted to do this is because, unlike the North American chart, where we could have the moon in the moon in Cancer on the ascendant, we weren't able to do that because the moon wasn't yet in Cancer when the moon was rising in the Western European chart, and the 8th Lunar Mansion begins at 0 degrees Cancer. So we have to have the moon in Cancer for it, and we just weren't able to. So this was the first time that we had something that lined up well to get the moon into Cancer. If I put the moon on the midheaven, we would have as you can see, the next two rising signs are Virgo and Libra, neither of which provide us with a very good ruler of the first house. Virgo would point us to Mercury, who is retrograde and conjoined Saturn. No. And then the Libra would point us to the retrograde Venus, which is also a no. So it was either use the late Leo ascendant or don't use anything at all, like don't get it at all. So that's the that's sort of the energy that's going into this talisman, I guess. Toward this time was really the only one that could work out very well at all. Unfortunately, there is not an 8th Lunar Mansion opportunity for the Australian continent. By the time that the moon in Cancer comes to the ascendant there, the moon will actually have been past the trine to Jupiter and be applying the opposition to the retrograde Venus, which is a big no. So unfortunately, Australia will not get to participate in 8th Lunar Mansion-ness this lunation, but hopefully next time. But one thing that everybody will get to participate in are Jupiter planetary talismans that start to happen now that Jupiter has ingressed into his domicile of Pisces. We'll start with Australia to kind of talk about them, but their opportunity for this lunation for a Jupiter planetary talisman takes place on January 6th at just before 9 in the morning at 8:53 a.m. And obviously, this one lines up pretty well. The big four things that we want in planetary talismanic elections are the planet that we're after, Jupiter in this case, in a sign that it does well in a sign that it has high dignity in. Jupiter here is in Pisces, so we have that. Another thing that we want is we want Jupiter to be very angular in our perspective election chart. Jupiter here is very close, very right on top of the ascendant degree, so we have that checked out as well. The third thing is we want the moon to be applying a proper aspect to Jupiter, the planet that we want to make a talisman of. And in this example, the moon is applying that conjunction to Jupiter, so we have that checked out as well. And what I mean by proper aspect is typically you don't want squares and oppositions. There can be times where you can use them, but I would not recommend heavily investing in the time, the energy, or the resources into one that utilizes a square or an opposition aspect between the moon and the target planet. And then the fourth and final piece is that we want it to be either Jupiter's day or Jupiter's planetary hour. The January 6th is a Thursday, so it takes care of the Jupiter day part of our equation. Having both the day and the hour would be preferable, would be the best, but one or the other can suffice. And that's it. That's your election. After that, you just start to make sure that like nothing bad is happening to the planets, that nothing, that they're not afflicted by anything. And we don't really have that in this chart. We have this kind of far away Mars square, which is about 14 degrees away. So I really wouldn't consider that a strong influence in this. The ascendant is also unafflicted. The moon is unafflicted. So all in all, it's a great chart. Definitely recommend it. If you have been waiting for a Jupiter and Pisces talisman, this is the time, Australia, to grab one. The North American continent has an opportunity for a Jupiter planetary talisman on January 10th, kind of the same day as that third Lunar Mansion talisman. And this takes place earlier than that at 9:45 a.m. And again, we have our same boxes checked out. The planet that we're after, Jupiter, is strong in its sign of domicile Pisces. It's very angular on the ascendant degree. The moon here is applying a sextile aspect to that Jupiter immediately. And the moon herself is very strong in Taurus, which is a nice bonus. And this takes place during Jupiter's hour. So this is something that you'll have to kind of finesse for your location to make sure that it is occurring on Jupiter's hour. But in my location, it was happening more in like the first quarter of the hour. So I feel pretty confident saying that, wherever you are, you should be able to get this to work right. So that's good. Again, we're looking for afflictions to the moon, to the ascendant, to Jupiter that might hinder our ability to use this to its maximum. And we don't really have anything, just like we were kind of looking out for in the Australian version of it. We have this kind of wide Mars square. It's pretty wide. I really wouldn't take it into consideration as anything to worry about. And then there's sort of a wide Saturn square happening, where Saturn's casting a square into like the mid degrees of Taurus. So the moon will eventually run into that. But for now, that's 12 degrees away from it. I wouldn't super be concerned about it either. And it's another example of a nice Jupiter talisman. If you've been waiting for one, if you didn't catch a good Jupiter and Pisces talisman the first time, this could be the time to make up for that. Western Europe and North Africa, I believe, have two opportunities for Jupiter planetary talismans. The first one takes place on January 10th at just before 4 p.m. This chart is set for 1551, so a little bit later than the third Lunar Mansion talisman that we talked about, which takes place on the same day. Here we are tapping into our same four things that we are most interested in having, into securing in our talismanic elections when we're talking about planets. Jupiter is strong in its domicile of Pisces. Jupiter is accentuated as being very angular, conjoined the midheaven. The moon is applying to the conjunction of Jupiter right now, and it takes place during Jupiter's hour. So all of our pieces, all of our ingredients to this Jupiter talismanic recipe are here. The ruler of the first house, the ascendant degree, and Jupiter itself are unafflicted by Mars and Saturn, and we don't have to worry about the sun being involved either. So all in all, again, another example of everything is there, and nothing that we don't want there is present. The only thing that might kind of take away from some of these elections, I guess, is that the moon in some of them is in Aquarius and not Pisces, which is, it's just a little bit less harmonious, I guess, than we would typically like it to be. But all in all, it's another one of those ideal things that we kind of have to decide if it's worth scrapping the whole election for or not. And I don't think it's worth it in this instance. So something to keep in mind. And then the second Jupiter planetary talismanic opportunity for Western Europe, North Africa, and our final chart that we're going to talk about today is going to be on January 10th at just after 10:30. This chart is set for 10:37. And here we have kind of our same things, the same things you've heard me say a few times now that hopefully you've memorized by now, so you know how to look for your own planetary talismans for your own location at different times in the future. But here, Jupiter is very strong in its domicile of Pisces. It's very angular in the first house. The moon's next aspect is a sextile to Jupiter. And it takes place during Jupiter's hour. You make sure to double check that for your location to make sure that it is still Jupiter's hour when you do this. It should have been just started not too long ago. Again, we have another issue with inharmoniousness, I guess we could say, where the North American version of this chart, which was very similar to it, again with Jupiter rising and the moon applying a sextile to it, that chart, the moon was in Taurus, a sign that she does more well in, is more harmonious for her. Here it's in Aries, a sign she's a little bit less harmonious with. So again, another instance of, is this something I would want to scrap the selection for? Probably not. The other thing that might be kind of worth keeping an eye on or thinking about is the angularity of Mars here on the midheaven. And this is something, Mars has been angular in a lot of these charts because that's just what happens when you have Pisces rising. You're going to have Sagittarius on the midheaven, and bam, that's where Mars is. We hate it, but that's what happens. Is kind of keeping tabs on some of this Martian energy and kind of making the judgment call of whether or not you want to, that you're going to be okay with it being there, because it's something that's going to be more obvious about the talisman. It's going to have like a more like a Martian highlight to it, which may not be what you're looking for in your Jupiter talisman. So you might want to wait if you don't want to get that involved in it. But all in all, I don't really think it's something to worry about too much, or else I would not include it. I wouldn't show it to you guys if I thought it was something worth being concerned about. But Mars and Saturn do not directly interfere with this chart by, afflicting Jupiter or the ascendant or the moon or anything. So I think it's fine just to kind of keep tabs on it, be aware that this is going to be a Jupiter talisman, probably with a little bit of a Martian highlight to it, and just kind of move on from that. You can hope and pray that there will be additional Jupiter planetary talismans, and there very well might be. I haven't looked all the way through it, but also kind of being aware that our time with a dignified Jupiter, because it's been split into two, we had our first instance of Jupiter ingressing earlier this year, and then it backed out. That now our time with it is very short, so we may not actually have a lot of the opportunities to take advantage of it as we initially thought. So just something to keep in mind. But all right, that is all the electional opportunities that I had to share with you guys for our Capricorn New Moon period. A lot of really great stuff. Definitely recommend picking up the third Lunar Mansion talisman, if nothing else in this chart or in this video. Everybody has an opportunity for it, so I better see everybody with one, or I'm going to be upset, because third Lunar Mansion talisman opportunities do not come around every day. They're really great talismans to have, to build a relationship with, and to keep if you ever need it. Even if you don't need it now, even if you don't think you need it now, I definitely recommend making it just to have it. For when you are faced with a situation where you need a genie, basically, to help you out of it. So everybody take care, and I will see you guys again on the Cancer full moon.